Excuse me. Praise the Lord and welcome to the Making of a Minister. We greet everyone watching in East Africa. It is still morning here in the U.S., and that's why I'm still drinking my morning coffee, but it is evening time there. I'm so thankful for technology. I'm so thankful for Pastor Orion, who is enabling us to utilize technology to preach the Word of God and train and equip ministers for the harvest. This series is called The Making of a Minister, and it really is broken down into three sections. The first section is called The Minister and His Person, and that section is all about preparing the man or preparing the woman of God. The second section is called The Minister and His Relationships, and that's all about the minister and his or her relationships with others, submission to spiritual authority, family issues, interaction with our peers, with our organization, with our community. Then section 3 is where we get into the true nuts and bolts, actual ministry and developing your various ministries, the pastoral ministry, the ministry to the lost, reaching and unchurched people, winning souls, the ministry of preaching and teaching. We'll talk about practical church ministry. But right now we are currently still on section 1. Section 1, again, is the minister and his person. We've talked about the minister and his calling, spiritual disciplines, his personal growth. A couple weeks ago, we started another lesson in this first section called Developing Personal Character and Integrity. And I know this is our third week on that lesson, but it is such an important lesson. In fact, it may be one of the most important lessons that we deal with in this entire series. Unfortunately, we all know of ministers who have fallen into sin, who have made moral mistakes and have never recovered from those things. And in my lifetime, I've seen powerful ministries that have fallen by the wayside because a man or a woman fell into the traps and the temptations of the enemy and made some very serious mistakes. And so we're talking about developing personal character and integrity, and that is so very important. And Lord willing, we will finish the lesson today, but I want to go back and just kind of hit the high points of what we have dealt with in the last few weeks. There is such a moral decline in our world today. We're living in a world of moral relativism, a world of situational ethics, a world where it seems like morality is just being tossed out the window. And in that environment of our world today, the Christian should stand as a bright light in the darkness. We should lead by example. We should stand as faithful men and women of God, of moral excellence, of character and integrity. Regardless of the lifestyle of the people around us, we as God's people, and especially ministers of the gospel, should be men and women of impeccable character and integrity. I said it the first week on this lesson, and I want to say it again. You can be assured that the day will come when you will be tempted to compromise your integrity. The day will come when progress seems to call for a compromise of conviction. The day will come when the most direct path to where you want to be is not necessarily the most ethical one. The day is going to come when an opportunity in your career will open up, but it will require a small compromise of your morals. The day will come when the easier thing to do in a situation will be to compromise your stand on some issue. The day will come when you could give in to your fleshly desire and no one would know about it. The day will come when dishonesty might bring you gain, financial gain in a situation, or when lying might seem the least hurtful option. Rest assured, the day will come when your character and your integrity will be challenged, will be tested. And you will have to make a choice when that day comes. Will you listen to that still small voice that says this is wrong? Will you choose the path of character and integrity? Will you choose to do the right thing no matter how difficult it is? Will you choose to be a person of character and integrity? I pray that you will be. And this lesson is designed to help you strengthen your character and integrity, to put safeguards and boundaries up in your life to help protect your reputation. And so that's what this lesson is all about. Character is moral excellence and firmness. Integrity is the quality of possessing and steadfastly adhering to high moral principles. Having integrity means that you do right in every situation. Having character and integrity means you do right no matter how big or small it is. You do the right thing regardless of the cost. That's what character and integrity is. I often say character and integrity is doing the right thing even when it's hard, or doing the right thing even when nobody knows. Why should we have character and integrity? We talked about this in previous lessons. Number one, it has to do with three different relationships: our relationship with God, with ourselves, and with others. And the first reason we need to have character and integrity is, number one, it pleases God. Our personal character and integrity is a testimony of God's redemptive work. So it pleases God. Secondly, it brings us personal satisfaction. This has to do with ourself. It makes you feel good about yourself when you know that you have chosen to do the right thing even when it's hard. And thirdly, and that other relationship, of course, has to do with others. And our third reason has to do with others. Character and integrity gives you moral authority as you lead others. Moral authority gives you true influence to lead and positively affect other people's lives. So in whatever area of leadership you find yourself in, lead with character and with integrity. In fact, as we learned about Aaron and the Urim and the Thummim, Aaron was supposed to lead with light and perfection, or character and integrity, near unto his heart. That breastplate was upon his heart. And lead with character and integrity in your heart. No amount of spiritual gifts, no amount of being able to do great mighty signs and wonders ever excuses the need for character and integrity. That's what Paul taught us when he said, though I speak with tongues of men and angels, but if I don't have love, if I don't have the fruit of the Spirit to go along with the gifts of the Spirit, then I'm just sounding brass and a tinkling cymbal. How do you develop personal character and integrity? We talked about this last week. How do you develop personal character and integrity? Number one is you practice doing the right thing. Every time you choose to do the right thing, even when it's difficult, you strengthen your moral character. The flip side is true as well. Every time you compromise, it just becomes that much easier to compromise the next time. Number two is practice character and integrity in the little things. I used the example last week of how I accidentally picked up a pen from the bank when I was doing some business and got back to my office and I realized I had taken the bank's pen. And some may say, oh, that's just a little thing. The bank doesn't care. But I got in my car and I drove back to the bank and took the pen in and said, I'm so sorry I accidentally took your pen. And that person was shocked that someone would drive all the way back just to bring an ink pen. But I've learned that if you practice character and integrity in the little things, then it strengthens you in all areas of your life. Number three, we saw last week, was be around people of character. You can't soar like the eagles when you're hanging out with the chickens. Get around people who are strong in their character and integrity. If you're always hanging out with people of questionable character, if you're always hanging out with people who don't have a commitment to do what is right, if you're not careful, that begins to rub off on you. Because other than our relationship with God, the single greatest determining factor in what we become in life are those people who are closest to us. So be around people of strong character and integrity. And here's where we left off last week, and we'll continue on with this today. Number 4 in your notes, if you're writing this down, number 4 is develop personal safeguards. Develop personal safeguards. I like to think of safeguards as being guardrails. I don't know what the landscape is in East Africa, but I know you have some mountainous regions in your country. And I don't know how it is there, but here in the U.S., sometimes when you're up driving on a road in the mountains, when there are dangerous cliffs on the side of that road, they will put up guardrails. Those are steel structures or other type of material, stone structures that will protect someone from going off and falling off into the ditch or falling off into that ravine and doing great harm to themselves. We need to establish some safeguards or guardrails in our lives. Some decisions we make ahead of time, that there are certain things that we just don't do. Certain places that we just don't go. Certain interactions with other people that we just will not have. And not because those things in of themselves may be sinful, but just they are guardrails. They are protecting us from undue temptation from the enemy. They are just safeguarding us in times of weakness, because there will be times when you are tired, when you are weak spiritually, times when you've gone through spiritual battles, or maybe you're in a low place spiritually of discouragement, and you are more vulnerable to temptation, to compromise. That's why you need safeguards. You need boundaries that will help protect you. I told you last week that I have some personal examples. I have a personal example that speaks very clearly of what I'm talking about. I choose that I don't meet privately in my office with another female other than my wife, of course, or a family member. If I do meet to counsel or speak with someone in the church in my office, if it's a female, then my wife is always with me. If my wife can't be with me, if someone just shows up at the church, a female, and she says, I'd like to talk to the pastor, I don't meet with her privately in my office. I may go outside the doors of the church and speak with her out in public, or I might go in the open sanctuary and speak with her, but I don't close the door and go in privately in my office with a female. Now, you may say, well, that's silly. there's nothing sinful about that. That may be true, but that's just a safeguard I put in my own life to protect me, to be a boundary that I say I just don't do this for my own safety, for the safety of that woman, for my own reputation. What if that woman would leave that office and accuse me of doing something improper? Well, that safeguard helps to protect my own reputation and protect my own character. I'm not saying that any pastor who meets with a woman in his office to speak with her means he's doing something wrong. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying I believe that is a good safeguard. I know pastors who have fallen into moral sin, fallen into adultery, and lost their family, and tragic, just lost their ministry. And maybe it all traces back and begins with some seemingly innocent counseling session in his office with a woman who's not his family or not his wife. So you need some various safeguards in your life that will just help to protect you. You know, I was praying the other morning, and the Lord brought to my mind the story of David and Bathsheba. And I thought about something in this story, a story that you all know well, a story that I've never seen before, something in this story that I'd never considered. You know that David is on the rooftop and he sees Bathsheba bathing, and you know how the tragic story ends. He calls for her and he commits adultery, and just it goes from bad to worse, and a cover up, and then he has Uriah murdered. Just a horrible, sad story. But I thought of something, and it's just my supposition, just my thought. I don't know if it's exactly how it happened, but I felt like the Lord was bringing something to my mind. I thought about this. Bathsheba probably bathed according to a regular schedule. I doubt if this was the first time that she had bathed there on that roof. It was likely, from the story, it was probably where she typically bathed, and there was probably some sort of regular schedule in her life. And I think people knew about that. There were probably others who knew that this beautiful woman went on the housetop at a certain time and bathed. And I'm just guessing, I don't know for a fact, but I'm just guessing that David knew about it as well. I think he went to that rooftop knowing that she would be out there. I think he knew the time that she bathed. And when he left his quarters in the palace and walked up the steps to the roof, he may have been saying to himself, well, I'm just going up to the roof to get some fresh air. Nothing wrong with that. Nothing sinful about going to the roof and getting some fresh air. But deep inside, I think David knew what he was doing. Now, I'm not saying that as he walked up those steps, he knew that he was going to commit adultery and try to cover it up and end up killing Uriah. But my point is that David crossed a line. He stepped over a boundary, or perhaps he never had a boundary that he never had the boundary up that he should have had up. He should have said, no, I know that 11 p.m. is when Bathsheba bathes, and I'm setting a boundary up in my life. I'm not even going to go up there. I refuse to be up on the rooftop during this time period because I don't want to put myself in a situation where I might be tempted. That's what I'm talking about when I speak about safeguards or boundaries in your life. Let me give you some suggestions, and these are my suggestions from my own experience, from my own dealing with a lot of young ministers. I do a lot of young ministry training here in the U.S., and our church is one of the missions of our church is to develop and raise up leaders for the harvest. And so I've been very involved over the years in doing a lot of pastoral training, and I teach a lot about how a man and a woman of God needs to have safeguards and boundaries. And there's some things that I share as my own list of some safeguards. Now, I know culturally there's some things that may be different from our nation to yours, and I would certainly never want to usurp the authority of your own pastor. But let me just throw some things out that I've used in my own personal life and things I have taught here. And And if your pastor disagrees, then you obey your pastor. But I believe that every married person, if you are married, I'm going to talk to you about some safeguards, and I think you should write this down. Number one, you need a safeguard that says, other than my spouse or my family, I will not have anything other than a professional relationship with someone of the opposite sex. All right? Other than my spouse or my family, I will not have anything but a professional relationship with someone of the opposite sex. This is a safeguard, a boundary I try to put in my own life, that other than my wife or my family, any relationship that I have with another female is strictly professional. It's not personal. I believe when you get married, you forfeit the right to have friendships with someone of the opposite sex. You don't need to be sharing your feelings, your personal feelings with someone of the opposite sex, your thoughts, problems with someone of the opposite sex, unless it's your spouse, your family, or your pastor and your pastor's wife together. You don't need to be sharing your feelings and your thoughts. You're supposed to open your heart to your spouse. This is a safeguard, a boundary. Don't open up your heart, your personal emotions and your feelings to someone of the opposite sex that's not your spouse. I've had people come and say, "Oh, but Pastor, my wife doesn't understand me. This woman in the church that I've talked to, she understands me." Well, if you need to talk to someone else other than your spouse, if you're having difficulties with your spouse, you need to talk to a trusted friend of the same sex, or you need to talk to your pastor, or talk to your pastor and your pastor's wife together. But any relationship with someone of the opposite sex is strictly professional. Now, obviously, in my dealings as a pastor, as a World Missions Director, I have dealings with people of the opposite sex, but that's strictly professional. I have secretaries that work in the church. I have secretaries that work in World Missions, but my relationship with them is professional. I don't open my personal feelings to someone of the opposite sex. Another safeguard, I believe that every married person, you have no business talking on the phone or emailing or writing to someone of the opposite sex about personal matters. If that person is not your spouse or your family or your pastor or your pastor's wife together, your pastor and your pastor's wife together, I don't believe you have any business talking on the phone, emailing, writing about personal matters. I've heard of men sending emails to married women, talking to them in their email about personal things, about sexual fantasies. Oh, brother, your house is ripe for the enemy to break it up. You are playing with fire and you will get burned. And furthermore, if you are receiving emails like that, if you're a married person and someone of the opposite sex is sending you an email that's personal in nature, you are just as guilty as the one sending if you receive that. First thing you ought to do if someone sends you an email that's inappropriate, that's talking about personal things or things that are not what you would share with someone who's not your spouse, you email them back immediately. You tell them this is inappropriate and I'm not comfortable receiving emails like that, and you copy your wife or your husband and your pastor with that response. That'll put an end to that immediately. You need to have safeguards in your life. You need a boundary. Here's another boundary. If you're writing these down, a safeguard that I teach our people here. You need a boundary or a safeguard that says, I will not be alone with someone of the opposite sex. Unless it's my spouse or my family, I will not be alone with them. You cannot give the devil an opportunity. I think I shared with you the last time that I will not get in a car with someone of the opposite sex, just me and another woman, unless that's my wife or my family. I don't do that. And I use the illustration that sometimes our secretaries at the church that will meet my wife perhaps at a restaurant, and it might just be a mile down the road. but I'll drive separate, and the secretary who's at the church will find another means of transportation to get there. We won't come together in the car and just ride 5 minutes down the road to meet my wife for lunch. You say, well, there's nothing wrong with your secretary riding with you in the car. That's true. There's nothing sinful inherently about that. But I've just established a safeguard in my life that I will not be alone with someone of the opposite sex who's not my family or my spouse. You know, there was a man in our church, a very good man, that fell into moral sin, fell into an adulterous situation. It was so devastating. It devastated his life, it devastated his ministry. I'm so thankful that over the years he was able to find some restoration, and the Lord helped him and forgave him, but there was still so much damage that was done. And this affair, he told me one time, because I asked him, I said, how did this all start? And he said, you know, it all started when I began sharing a ride in my vehicle with another woman. We were carpooling together to work, and we were both lived in the same general vicinity, and we both worked at the same factory or the same business, and we shared a ride. It was just me and her in the car driving from our houses to the workplace. And that's innocent in of itself. There was nothing sinful about that. But he said over the months of driving together, just me and her alone, this woman who was not my spouse, we began obviously having conversation in the car together. And over the months, that conversation began to become more and more personal. And she began to open up about things in her life and maybe problems she was having at home. And he opened up about some issues he was having with his spouse. And that relationship began to become more and more inappropriate. And over the course of time, the enemy began to work and lay a very well-planned trap for this man. Eventually, it led to a physical relationship. But I thought, you know, if he had that boundary, that safeguard that said, I just won't be alone with another woman in any circumstance unless somebody's with us, unless it's a group, or unless my wife is with me. I'm not going to be in a car with somebody that I'm not married to of the opposite sex. Perhaps if he had had that boundary, it would have saved him from going off into the ditch and having such pain and such devastation in his life and in his ministry. You need a boundary. Here's another. Write these down. You need a boundary or safeguard that says, with the exception of my spouse or my family, I will have no physical contact with someone of the opposite sex, other than a handshake or laying my hand on their head for prayer in an appropriate place. Of course, as a minister, I pray for other females in church, lay my hand on their head, and I pray as the Bible teaches. But I don't have physical contact. I don't hug. There might be some rare exception. If it's an elderly woman who is a mother figure to me, I may give her a hug, or there may be some rare exceptions. But as a general rule, I don't have physical contact. I don't hug, and I'm a very affectionate person. I'm the kind of person that likes to hug people, but I'm very cautious. In fact, sometimes a female will come and begin to greet me and want to embrace me, and I stick out my hand and to shake hands. And I understand culturally things are different, and perhaps handshaking is not a cultural thing in East Africa. I don't know if it's different there, but my point is simply that you need some type of safeguard that says I don't physically touch other than something very specific like a handshake or praying with somebody. It's just a safeguard. I'm not saying that there's something inherently wrong if a man hugs another woman, but for me, This is the boundary that I put in my life to help protect my character and my integrity. Let me talk to single ministers. If you are a young man or a young woman and you are unmarried yet still, and you have not yet gotten married, you need some safeguards and boundaries in your life. You need a boundary or a safeguard that says, I will not have a personal relationship with someone else's spouse of the opposite sex. They are off limits. They are taken. Similar to what I said about only having a professional relationship as a married man with another woman, only professional. I don't have a personal relationship. And the same thing is true with single adults. You don't need to be having anything other than a professional relationship with someone of the opposite sex who is another man or woman's partner. They are off limits. You have no business having anything but a professional relationship with them. If you're a single, you should not be sharing personal things with another person's spouse on the phone or an email or in private conversations. You need a boundary. I'm talking to singles now. You need a boundary or a safeguard that says, I'm not going to spend time alone with my boyfriend or my girlfriend in a private place. Obviously, if you're dating, you want to have some time to get to know that person, but you need a boundary that says if we need to have time getting to know one another alone, it's going to be in a public place where other people are nearby. You don't need to be alone in some dark place, alone in your house or in your bedroom with your boyfriend or girlfriend. You say, oh, we're just talking. There's nothing bad going on. Don't give the devil an opportunity. I've heard young people, young adults, singles tell me, well, we're strong, we're spiritual, we're not gonna do anything bad. But if you're really strong and really spiritual, then you would be wise enough to know that you would not put yourself in a position where you would be tempted. Because as we know, the Bible teaches very plainly that sexual relations is only for a man and a woman who are joined together in marriage, and you should keep yourself sexually pure before you're married. And sexual relations with your boyfriend or girlfriend before marriage, that is condemned in the scripture. It is a violation of your body as the temple of the Holy Ghost. So have safeguards as a single person that says, I'm not going to be alone with my boyfriend or girlfriend in some dark bedroom somewhere alone when no one else is there. I'm going to be very careful not to put myself in positions where I might be tempted. You need a boundary. If you're a single, you need a boundary or a safeguard that says, I won't even date someone who is not a committed apostolic Christian. You say, well, I'm dating this person. They're not of the faith, but I'm not really getting serious. It's just a friendship. Just be careful. Have some boundaries in your life that says, I will not date someone who is not apostolic. Whether you are married or unmarried, here's a safeguard or a boundary that I teach our ministries here. If you are married or unmarried, you don't need to have an email account that is inaccessible to your spouse, or if you're single, to your parents. My wife is able to look at anything on my computer. My wife knows my passwords. May I advise you, it's good, parents, for you to, if you have a computer in your house, to keep that computer out in the open. Keep it in the kitchen or in the family room or somewhere that is out in the open. If you're a parent and you have teenagers, you need to keep your computer password protected so that your teens can only be on the internet when you are home and when there's some accountability. There is so much evil that is transmitted through the internet, and there's so many people who have fallen into moral failure, and it all started with inappropriate things they were sending in an email, through an email account, or things that are on the internet. Pornography is so accessible on the internet, and you need safeguards and boundaries. Young person, you need safeguards and boundaries If you're married or unmarried, I believe that if you're married, that your spouse needs to have access to anything you have or do on the computer. You should not be able to hide the fact that you could send emails to someone that is inappropriate. If you're unmarried, if you're single, young adult, then your parents need to have access to your computer and to your passwords. I have teenagers. Well, I only have one left in my house. My other two are grown in their 20s, but throughout their time here at home, I would tell them, if you have a phone, then your father has access to that phone. And any login, any password, they would share with me, because at any time I could check anything they were sending or watching or viewing. That's just a safeguard. That's a boundary that helps to protect us. We must protect our character and integrity. You may say, well, I'm strong and I don't need these safeguards. No one is so strong that they don't need safeguards. James said this in James chapter 1 and verse 14, but every man is tempted when he is drawn away of his own lust and enticed. That phrase says drawn away. Drawn away from what? Drawn away from his own boundaries, drawn away from his safeguards that he's put in place. Safeguards are not a guarantee. They're not 100% fail-safe or foolproof. Safeguards are not a guarantee. They only work if you don't step over them. I've known people that they say they have this safeguard, but then they step over that safeguard and they violate that boundary they put in their life. So even with safeguards, some people have fallen into sin, but you are much more likely to be tempted of the enemy and to get off track if you don't have safeguards in your life. I was thinking about Joseph. What an incredible example of character and integrity. In Genesis chapter 39, what an incredible story. You know, Joseph was tempted by this woman that was very clear in her intentions. She said, come and lie with me. There was no question about this woman's motive and intentions. But Joseph stood strong as a man of character and integrity. I know some men, unfortunately, Christian men, with such weak character and integrity, men that have no boundaries in their lives. And I wonder sometimes if the only reason they haven't committed adultery is because the opportunity has not yet arisen. I feel like if a woman, there are men, unfortunately, it grieves me to say it, but I know men who are professing Christians that I feel like if a woman opened the door, or if a woman was willing, that man would walk right through it, or vice versa. That woman would walk right through that door if that man was willing. But here is Joseph. Think about it. Day after day, this woman is enticing him. And there's no question as to her intentions. She says it outright. She says, come and lie with me. Come and have sex with me. She's probably a beautiful woman. She was married to a very prosperous, well-known man. In that day, if you were prosperous and had a lot of money, your spouse was probably a very attractive spouse. And so this is probably a very beautiful woman. Yet he has the strength of character to continue, resist that temptation. What an amazing example of character and integrity. What gave Joseph that strength? He makes reference to three things. I want to share those three things with you today. He makes reference. I'm thinking about the strength of Joseph's character and integrity. And he makes reference to three things. First of all, he says, look what Potiphar has done for me. He says, Potiphar trusted me. Potiphar was good to me. He says, in essence, how could I do this to Potiphar? How could I sleep with his wife. Potiphar's been good to me. He trusted me. And he asked this question of himself. He said, how could I do this to Potiphar? The first thing that comes to Joseph's mind is, what would this, if I committed this act with this woman, what would it do to Potiphar? Brother, sister, when you are in a situation where you are tempted to do wrong, whatever type of wrong that is, ask yourself, how could I do this to my wife? That's in essence what Joseph was saying. How could I do this to this man who has been good to me? Ask yourself, how could I do this to my wife? Or how could I do this to my husband? How could I do this to my children? How could I do this to my family? So the first thing that Joseph asked is, how could I do this to this other individual who's been good to me, that I have a relationship with, who has trusted me? That to me speaks of others that are close to me, my wife or my husband, my children, my family, my friend. How could I do this to them? But then secondly, Joseph says, he makes this statement in the story. He said, there is none greater in this house than I. He's talking about himself. Really, Joseph is saying, how could I do this to myself? How could I live with myself if I went down this road with Potiphar's wife? Sometimes you need to think about what it would do to you. You need to say, I deserve better than to fall into sin. The devil may tell me I'm worthless, but I'm a child of God, and I am better than committing adultery or stealing or lying or doing something unethical. You are a better person than what the enemy is trying to make of you. So ask yourself the question, how could I do this to myself? How could I respect myself if I did this wrong? How would this affect my self-esteem, my self-worth? Then Joseph says, how could I sin against God? That's the third thing he said. So the first is, how could I do this to Potiphar? Then he says, how could I do this to myself? And then he says, how could I sin against my God? With all that God has done for me, with all the blessings and the goodness of God upon my life, how could I do this to God? And so asking yourself these three questions, it helps you to keep those safeguards and boundaries. It helps to protect you when you ask yourself these questions. If you get, not if, but when you get into a situation where you are tempted to compromise your character, it's going to happen. It will happen. It may not happen with this particular sin or this particular temptation, but it will be something. The opportunity will always come when the enemy will test you to try to get you to compromise your moral integrity. In that time, ask yourself the question, because this will strengthen you. It will strengthen your commitment to do what is right. When you ask yourself the question, if I did that, if I compromised my integrity, how could I do that to my wife? How could I do that to my husband? How could I do that to my children? Then secondly, ask yourself the question, how could I do that to myself? I'm better than that. And third, how can I do this to my God who's been so good to me? I'm not quite finished with the lesson, but let's pray just a moment. Lord, I pray that you would strengthen every man today, every woman today, every young man, every young woman today who's listening, every minister in the making. I pray you help us understand how important our character and integrity, our reputation is. And Lord, the enemy is so sly and deceptive and is laying so many well-planned traps to try to bring us down. So I pray you help every man or woman of God today to establish common sense boundaries and safeguards in their lives to help protect them Keep them from falling off the road into some ravine or off into some cliff. Strengthen our character and integrity. In Jesus' name. Number 5, we're talking about how, remember now, we're talking about how to develop character and integrity. We're talking about 5 different things. Number 1, practice doing the right thing. Number 2, if you remember, was practice character and integrity in the little things. Number 3 was be around people of character and integrity. Number 4, and that's where we spent a lot of time last week and today, develop personal safeguards. Now let's move on. Number 5, we're talking about number 5 of how to develop character and integrity. Number 5 is have accountability with a trusted friend or minister. Have accountability. It's good to be accountable to someone else. When we are accountable in our life to someone else, again, it's not fail-safe. It's not 100%. Doesn't work 100% of the time. But it certainly is a safety net. It certainly gives us an advantage. It helps protect us. It's good to be accountable to someone. I was at a conference a few years ago, and I got a phone call from a pastor that I knew. He and his wife were at the conference, and they were in a hotel room at that conference. And he called me and he said, I need you please to come to my room. He was obviously upset. And I went to the room of this dear friend. And when I went into the room, the man and his wife were sitting on the bed. She was sitting on, it was a room that had two beds, and she was sitting on one bed crying, and he was sitting in a chair on the other bed, and he was crying, visibly upset. He broke down and he began to sob, and he confessed to a problem that he had with internet pornography. She began to sob and cry and talk about how hurt she was. He began to confess how disgusted he was with himself and how much he hated himself for what he was involved in. But he was wise in this respect. He said, I cannot fight this alone. He said, I need accountability. He said, would you pray with me? Would you help me be accountable? He then said something that let me know that he was going to make it through, and he was going to find restoration, and he was going to find deliverance from this problem, and he was going to be victorious and go on and do a great work for God. He said to me, I'll do whatever it takes to save my marriage. I'll do whatever it takes to save my ministry, my walk with God, to save my dignity and my self-esteem. He said, I'm accountable to you, Pastor Ball. He said, you tell me whatever I need to do. I'll do whatever I need to do. I'll get rid of my computer. If I have to spend my life without a computer, if that's what it takes, I'll do it. He said, I'll set up any safeguard in my life that you tell me I need to set up. I'll take every precaution that you tell me I need to take. You know, I've counseled with other men who were unwilling to make any changes or sacrifice. Other men in the same situation who've fallen into internet pornography, and their life was devastated, their marriage was devastated. And I've come to them and talked to them about safeguards and boundaries and about steps they need to take to protect themselves. And they said, oh, I can't do that. I'm not willing to make those sacrifices. Well, I knew in that moment when that man said, I'm not willing to make those changes, that he would never be free. He would never be restored. But the minister who said, I'll do whatever I have to do. Well, we prayed. God touched us, strengthened us. He gave his password to his computer to his wife. He became accountable to me and said, you can check on anything I'm doing. You call me. Call me once a week and ask me, Pastor, how are you doing? Are you sharing your struggles with your wife? Have you set up these safeguards and boundaries that I've asked you to set up? He said, yes, sir. He would ask me, I want you to call me. I want you When we see one another, I want you to take my computer and I want you to look through and make sure that I want you to know that I'm accountable. I need that accountability. So I called him from time to time. I said, how are you doing? Are you having any problems? Have you visited anything inappropriate on the internet? If I see him at a conference, he's given me the permission. I can still, years later, I can still come and say, give me your computer. I want to check. How are you doing? Are you doing all right? Now, I know it's not fail-safe, and I know people have said, well, if a man will do wrong, then he would certainly lie about it. Well, perhaps. But having accountability with others is still a safety net. It may just save someone's ministry. You need to find someone that you trust, someone who has the guts to ask you tough questions, someone who's sensitive enough in the Holy Ghost that if you were lying, they would know it. And you just share with them your battles and your areas of weakness and be accountable. So this is a fifth way we can strengthen our character and our integrity, is to be accountable to some people, to make sure that we have others in our lives that are helping watch over us and helping to protect us and helping strengthen us in times of weakness. Character and integrity is so, so important. And so I pray today that you will take these 5 suggestions, 5 ways of strengthening our character and integrity, and apply them to your life. Because we need laborers in the harvest. The harvest is plenteous, but the laborers are few. And we need men and women who will give themselves to the ministry. But the devil wants to take you out. And if we don't develop strong character and integrity, we may just fall to the temptations of the enemy. And the enemy is seeking to kill and steal and destroy. So let's be sober and vigilant, because our adversary, the devil, as a roaring lion, is seeking whom he may devour. I know I've gone a little longer than normal today, but there's just a few things I don't want to go into I don't know. This is so, so important that I don't want to speed through the rest of this content. So I think I'm just going to end here today, and we'll just do one more lesson on this next week. I'm sorry. I'm not sorry. I'm not apologizing for taking several weeks on this subject, because it is so very, very important. But next week, I will conclude, Lord willing, on this subject of character and integrity, because I want to talk about something else very important, and that is how to repair damaged character and integrity. I'm so glad that God is a God of mercy and grace, and that even if a man or a woman has made mistakes, we all make mistakes, there is a way to be restored. There is a way to rebuild. If your character and your integrity has suffered loss, if the enemy has been successful in causing you to compromise your character and integrity and you've suffered loss, I want to give you hope today. I don't want to end today without you knowing there is hope that you can rebuild. Now, it takes time, and it's not an easy process, and we'll talk about that next time, how to repair damaged character and integrity. In the meantime, God bless you. Thank you for tuning in to another session of how to develop character and integrity. God bless you. We will see you